Russia's message is pretty clear. It will continue the assault until Ukraine surrenders. Good morning. I'm Erica Hill in New York.
And I'm Jim Sciutto reporting from Lviv, Ukraine. Happening right now, Russia continues to bombard the already devastated city of Mariupol. Officials say that Putin's army dropping bombs on a humanitarian corridor meant for safe civilian evacuations. We do want to warn you, some of these pictures we're about to show you are disturbing. This morning, just gut-wrenching images after a Russian airstrike on a maternity hospital in Mariupol. Among the dead, a young girl. President Zelensky called the attack proof of, quote, a genocide of Ukrainians. So many bodies, those bodies now buried in a mass grave as the city of Mariupol endures an unrelenting Russian assault. Officials there say at least 1,300 civilians have been killed since that shelling began. 1,300. The cost of war heavy on both sides. U.S. officials now estimate that Russia has lost some 6,000 soldiers. That's double their estimate from earlier this week. We should note it's incredibly difficult to make these assessments, especially as the fighting unfolds in real time across this country. But for comparison, that figure, 6,000, is already near the total number of U.S. soldiers killed in both Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001, over 20 years. We're covering every angle of this breaking story as only CNN can. Our reporters and correspondents throughout Ukraine, Russia, Belgium, as well as back home in the U.S. We do want to begin, though, with CNN senior international correspondent Matthew Chance. He is in the capital, Kyiv. Matthew, you've been covering these negotiations, if we want to call them that, between Ukrainians and Russians. The foreign minister said, the Ukrainian foreign minister said they ended today without progress, and he was even taking some digs, it seemed, at whether Lavrov was speaking for Vladimir Putin. What more happened in those talks?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've spoken to officials here in Ukraine with knowledge of those talks. They said, look, they felt that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was there just to listen. He wasn't there to offer any ideas of his own. The phrase they used is, it takes two to tango, but the Russian foreign minister wasn't authorized to dance at these talks. But nevertheless, the two sides did come together, and that in itself is a positive. At the highest level talks that have taken place since this conflict began, and both sides came to the table, if I can draw a silver lining out of this, with some elements of compromise. The Russians have backed away from the idea they want a puppet regime to be installed inside Ukraine that would be pro-Russian. And on the other side of the table, the Ukrainians have started speaking publicly about what they would be prepared to do to back off this call that they've had consistently to join NATO, the Western military alliance. But on the other issues, the territorial concessions, Crimea, the Eastern republics, and all the things that have happened in between, the ceasefire, the humanitarian corridors, the two sides seem as far apart as ever, Jim.
That is notable, the movement you do cite there. We'll see if that leads somewhere in the coming days. At the same time, President Zelensky, he says Ukraine's still trying to secure these humanitarian corridors, and we've seen occasional success, but a whole bunch of cases where they've not proven to be humanitarian or safe at all. What are we finding out today?
Yeah, well, particularly in the city of Mariupol, which has been under heavy bombardment, there's an urgent need for a humanitarian, exit from that place, and that hasn't been successful yet. They haven't managed to come together on that. But here in Kiev, it's been a bit more successful, I'd say. There's a humanitarian corridor supposedly open today. There was one yesterday as well, and we went there. We met the hundreds upon hundreds of people that are quickly as possible making their way out of the areas to the north of the city where there has been fierce fighting. They had some absolutely horrific stories to tell about what they were leaving behind. Take a listen. Nadia, where have you come from, Nadia? From Vozo, which is a town up there.
Yes,
And
this is a place which was very dangerous, and there are a lot of Russians and a lot of Chechens, I don't know.
Russians and Chechens.
Yes, Russians and Chechens, and they kill our owner of the house where we sitting.
They killed the owner of the house.
Yes, they killed the owner of the house.
And so you must have been, and your family over here, you must have been terrified. Frightening.
It was terrified, absolutely terrified. But family is okay.
Okay.
Now we are going to the
Where
10 days in the underground.
you've been 10 days underground.
10 days underground.
Editor Nick Payton-Walsh, he's in Odessa, Ukraine. Nick, as you know, authorities in Mariupol, they're accusing Russia of deliberately bombing the so-called Green Corridor designated to evacuate residents. What evidence have you seen and heard from officials there?
Well, certainly, despite the message from President Vladimir Zelensky suggesting there may have been some success in humanitarian corridors, it doesn't appear to have been the case when it comes to Mariupol. And certainly I'm in the other side of the Crimean Peninsula here in Odessa, so not an eyewitness to that. But it is absolutely clear from the images that have emerged from there that the size of crater, the size of devastation that hit that maternity hospital speaks to, frankly, what the foreign policy chief of the European Union, Joseph Borrell, said just a few moments ago was a heinous war crime. I mean, startling to have the Russian government in one breath suggest that this was essentially a place where far-right Ukrainian nationalists had holed up, and then at the same time see these images emerge of people wounded, mothers wounded. It appears that 3 of those who were injured have since lost their lives. Mariupol besieged and surrounded, it seems, for 4 successive days now. The latest update about 3:30 this afternoon seems to suggest that there'd been no real access for the humanitarian corridor at all. And these tactics, frankly, shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise. We've seen, Russia behind this in other conflicts. It's been involved in specifically Syria, where there have been multiple allegations. They specifically targeted medical facilities, not just with one strike often, but often with a second one, to try and get the first responders too. So devastating images certainly out of Mariupol. That I think if anybody was possibly debating whether there was some sort of accuracy or good intent against military targets for Russia, that particular incident made it absolutely clear that anything is considered to be a target. Jim?
Nick Payton-Walsh there, thanks very much.